Good morning, good morning. It's great to stay up late. Good morning to you. Alright, so I was having a conversation with my mom last night, and I couldn't remember the name of the group, but there's a whole history behind Occupy that I'd like to talk to you about that is not even mentioned in this. So let's go through it.
We are the 99%!
Back in 2011, it seemed like Occupy Wall Street would change America. The movement that started in New York City's financial district took over the nation in a matter of weeks.
There was Occupy Portland, there was Occupy Los Angeles, there was Occupy you name it.
It was a circus, it was a festival, it was a party.
It was also infiltrated. Seriously infiltrated. Potentially by the FBI, I don't know. It might have been Russians. I have no idea, but it was seriously infiltrated.
Protesters wanted to dismantle a system that they saw as only benefiting the rich, and at least for a moment it seemed like they could.
Shut down Wall Street! Shut down Wall Street!
But their fight against inequality was a messy one, and the movement broke up almost as quickly as it had started.
It was so dedicated not to having a hierarchy and not to having a strategy that it inevitably was doomed.
Today, it's business as usual in New York's financial district. So what happened to...
Yeah, doesn't that kind of sound like Antifa, you guys? Same concept. Independent groups, they're not actually a coordinated national effort yet. I never fucked around with Antifa, you guys. Like, that is just not something I was going to touch, because they said that they were there to protect protesters, which might have been the original goal. But like I said, when you have these movements like this, they get infiltrated.
Occupy Wall Street, and did it make a difference at all? On September the 17th of 2011, protesters descended on Wall Street, where the New York Stock Exchange is located, a symbolic site for a fight against inequality.
There was a lot of social ferment in the air.
And there were also the anti-austerity protests that were really gaining traction and heating up across Europe, in Spain, in Greece.
This was also the time the Arab Spring was sweeping through the Middle East. Aaron Gupta and
I don't know if you guys remember that. I mean, some of you are a lot younger that are learning about this for the first time. But the Arab Spring was when the people were rising up in those particular countries and overturning government. And it's not, I mean, they had terrible government, yes, but what they put in place afterwards, I don't know that it was better, per se, right?
Michael Levitin were both involved in the protests in New York. They also set up the Occupied Wall Street Journal, but we'll come back to that later. Between 1979 and 2007, the household after-tax income of the top 1% of earners in the US had increased nearly 4 times, or 275%. Those at the lower end of the scale had seen only an 18% rise.
Trickle-down economics, y'all. Trickle-down economics. That was a Reagan initiative, you guys.
The fact that we had just gone through the greatest recession since the Great Depression sort of forced the subject into public conversation.
Protests in New York had in fact started in June 2011, when dozens sat outside New York City Hall for weeks to protest against proposed budget cuts to education and other public services. Meanwhile, left-wing activists met.
Yeah, just leading up to this, we had a pretty much a market crash after the George Bush years. And when Obama transitioned into his first term of being president, there were some bailouts that happened for the auto industry and the financial markets because as a result of the legislation that George W. Bush had put in place. And people were losing their homes. There were a lot of short sales. I actually was able to get my condo during this time period because it was a short sale. The people that owned it previously to me, the value of the property dropped so significantly, and they still have the same neighbors as I do, and so they were being harassed because they owned a dog. I'm in the same situation now. I'm being harassed because I own a dog.
In New York to plan a larger protest around Wall Street in Lower Manhattan. The rallying point was the iconic Wall Street Bull statue. It was the anti-capitalist magazine Adbusters that seized the moment with a call to action under the new...
Somewhere on my Facebook photo albums, but I don't know, they've been deleting a bunch of bullshit. I have a picture of my son and I at that statue. They have put a little girl in front of the bull who is standing defiantly in front of the bull. And there's a meaning behind this. I can't remember. There's two statues there that represent what kind of economy we're in. But my memory is escaping me.
Occupy Wall Street hashtag. Not only was the location symbolic, so too was the date, September the 17th, the same date the US Constitution was signed. But police barricaded the area, forcing protesters to spread across the financial district. They ended up a few blocks away at Zuccotti Park.
Zuccotti Park has some unique things as far as parks go. Not only its status as a privately owned public space, but power outlets, like every 10, 15, 20 feet. People could charge their phones, they could run extension cables.
Being a privately owned public space meant that police officers could not force...
And I'm fairly certain they were doing that because they had the issues with like hurricanes rolling through. And so they needed to give easy access to power to people when there was a severe weather event.
Forced protesters to leave without being requested to do so by the owner, Brookfield Office Properties. Within weeks, protest marches starting from Zuccotti Park were drawing in thousands of people.
You could tell instantly that this was really something that hadn't been experienced in modern America, certainly.
The encampment grew into a city of its own.
It was just this dynamic village in the middle of this concrete canyon.
Dozens of tents were set up. Food donations from places like Ben & Jerry's flooded in.
You had a kitchen, you had this huge library, you had education, you had a tech hub.
Well, I don't know that this was all that unique because during the Great Depression, there were tent cities all across America. So it's not like this is the first time this has happened, but they're acting like it is. I don't know. The other thing is that when there are extreme responses to government legislation, they act like we're crazy. We're crazy. We're cray-cray, right? The Occupy movement ultimately transformed into Our Revolution chapters and Feel the Burn democratic clubs. And so you have to be cautious of all of that because they're not advancing what's best for working people. They have been seriously infiltrated. I'm not even joking about that.
And the city even had its own newspaper, the occupied Wall Street Journal.
So we started production about 8 p.m. on a Thursday night. Within 36 hours, we had 50,000 copies of the newspaper in Zuccotti Park.
Meanwhile, organizers held public forums that anyone could participate in.
It was this great democratic theater, but it also proved to be a real flaw. You'd have hundreds of people debating for 4 hours. Do we put the compost bin here or do we put the compost bin here?
And while protesters said they represented 99% of the population, the reality at the start was that it was mostly white, college-educated young adults. And for those watching at home, it was unclear what exactly the occupiers wanted. But then the tone changed. Clashes with police intensified, and Occupy began to make headlines for entirely different reasons.
Clashes were especially prone to happen when there was marches, when there was obstruction of traffic, which was very frequent with Occupy.
Tension reached a head on September the 24th, when hundreds of protesters marched north from Zuccotti Park to Union Square. Around 80 people were arrested, and about 5 were pepper sprayed.
This blew up. And what happened was...
Yeah, and seriously, our police agencies really need to reconsider those sorts of tactics of rubber bullets, of pepper spray, because you don't know what underlying health conditions people might have and whether or not you're actually going to be committing murder by doing that.
The occupation completely changed. There was just a huge amount of support.
Then on October the 1st, more than 700 protesters were arrested during a march across the Brooklyn Bridge. What these arrests did was add more fuel to the fire. By October the 5th, more had joined the protests, including labor unions.
We were told you work hard, you go to college, you get a job. You work hard, you go to college now, there's no jobs because the folks up there that you say are staring down on us made sure that all the work is going overseas.
By the next day, the movement had spread across the country, from Los Angeles.
I want to take you back downtown to that Occupy LA protest, which may be getting out of hand,
to DC and Boston. It was violent confrontation.
Yeah, you seriously have to be really cognizant of the fact that there are a lot of people grifting from these movements and setting up fake fundraisers just so they can fund their own lives, their own existence. And I've seen it firsthand. I've talked about it with my fellow activist friends. It's this was terribly bastardized, you guys.
Confrontations with police rather than protesters' demands that kept the movement in the news. Occupy was spreading worldwide, but by mid-November, the owners of Zuccotti Park had lost patience. They said the park had become dangerous and unhealthy. There were also reports that the encampment attracted homeless people and drug users, and that women had to reportedly set up a female-only sleeping area after sexual assault accusations surfaced.
Yeah, by the way, like, just because you set up a female-only sleeping area does not mean that you're going to prevent sexual assaults. As somebody who has been confused as a lesbian for much of my life, I'm telling you straight up, there have been a lot of women who have just grabbed me. And I've had to, repeatedly tell them I don't swing that way, but I have a lower voice. I generally can wear my hair short, and people just make assumptions,
Adbusters encouraged protesters to claim victory and head home, but that didn't happen. So early in the morning of November the 15th, police officers handed out eviction notices to protesters at the park. Those who resisted were met with batons and pepper spray, and nearly 200 were arrested.
They threw away everything, tents, just garbage, computers, books. They trashed the library.
Where's our tents? Where's our pets? Where's our clothes? Where's our bins? Where's our books? Where's my library?
And despite efforts to regroup, Occupy wouldn't be the same again. The protester was named Time magazine's 2011 Person of the Year. But what had the months of protest achieved? Very little in terms of tangible policy change, and the gap between rich and poor in the States is today higher than ever. Former Labour Secretary Robert Reich visited the Occupy Wall Street camp a number of times.
This country...
I think his name's pronounced Reich, actually, but I don't know. But you also have to consider that America still has a lot of racist sentiments. And Obama had just become our president, and he was trying to clean up a great repression. What is they didn't want to call it a Great Depression, but it was recession, right? Great recession. And so we're talking about a lot of people getting involved and taking advantage of the fact that our president was black. So, I mean, in hindsight, you can see how messed up all this stuff was and how it wasn't even sincere. And yes, they're still working on these goddamn buildings around me, and I'm still suffering from chronic headaches. Anyway, let's continue.
Is beginning to discuss an issue and a set of issues it has avoided discussing for years.
He says it failed because of lack of strategy.
It was a successful movement in the sense that it brought to the public's attention the inequality of income, wealth, and political power in this country, but you can't have a movement unless you combine activists who are getting and receiving attention with activists who, behind the scenes, are working to mobilize and organize people in a very specific political direction. Without both, you really end up, just as the Occupy movement did, without very much to...
Well, even with the name recognition, Mr. Reich, our revolution failed because they put their C players in charge of the organization, right? So I think the first president, head, whatever the title was Nina Turner, and she was so incapable of working with government that it made it impossible for us to be successful. Because I had an Our Revolution chapter, you guys, but I wasn't in the know, if you will. Like, I didn't rise up from the Occupy movement. I was just an educated white woman, you know. What are you gonna do with that? Like, I have to deal with the sexism in my life, for real.
Go for it.
But the movement itself became a blueprint for protests around the world and brought the issue of inequality into mainstream politics.
It was always going to fail, but it really set the stage for the next decade, from the Black Lives Matter movement to the climate justice movement to low-wage workers movement.
We wouldn't have had, for example, Bernie Sanders and even Elizabeth Warren were it not for a lot of the groundwork done by the Occupy movement.
10 years on, Occupy Wall Street continues to resonate.
There will always be an Occupy movement. Occupy was not the first, it will not be the last.
Yeah, I mean, I will give credit to the Occupy movement for that it did open minds and give us the perspective that certain terms for political beliefs were maybe being demonized more than they should be. But, you know, I think we could have looked to, like, people like Boots Riley. And, you know, I don't know. I don't know if he got involved in this sort of stuff, but he was definitely doing some hard work.
Demonstrations are ways of attracting attention, but they are just the start. The critical element that was missing 10 years ago, that if there is going to be a successful anti-corporate populist movement in the future, must incorporate, is a leadership that focuses on political strategy.
Keep moving, guys. You might get arrested for standing in your own country. Things got bailed out. We got sold out.
Let them go! Let them go! Let them go!
Okay, you guys. Well, I mean, that's just a basic summary of where we are today. And if you follow any of the seer channels, right, like the people that are bringing up like Nostradamus and other visionaries, Neo Tarot, they're talking about massive changes happening in 2026. And I'm feeling it. I don't know about you guys, but I'm feeling it. Like, how do we have these sex rings going on, right? P. Diddy, Trump, all this junk going on right now. You got Hassan Piker showed up to a P. Diddy party. You've got Prince Andrew lost his title. He's no longer a prince. And we're about to get the Epstein files. So I'm looking forward to covering that news break too. But I'm also sick of the overspending in my community, just so that they can try and say that, oh yes, we're fine, right? All the overspending, it's ridiculous, you guys. Okay, let's see how today goes.